Welcome to Be Better, the podcast where we unravel the secrets of successful entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Iolanthe Gabri.
And I'm your host, James Shadrack. Join us as we dive into the art of developing a brand presence, engaging with self-reflection for business growth, and navigating the world of networking.
We'll discuss the ethics of cold outreach, the power of thought leadership, and why luck has no place in business.
Stay tuned for valuable insights on creating a niche, building a core network, and the impact of automation on authentic communication.
This is Be Better, where entrepreneurs come to level up their game.
Let's dive in and unlock the secrets to your entrepreneurial success. All right, so we're back again, and this time we are talking about networking or cults of networking.
Yes.
I know you've had some experience in the networking space.
I am a big networker, and James, I have a lot of big feelings about networking, which I think will be helpful for our listeners to delve into today, because networking seems to be something that most people have some feels about.
Yes.
When you first began your production business, what kind of networking did you do, and how did you feel about networking?
Yeah, so I came into networking in a really sort of organic way, where I started working out of this co-working space and was a big sort of set of people. And so I went from not knowing anybody to all of a sudden knowing hundreds and hundreds of people in business. And there was no incentive to talk to people or do business. It was just talking to people, getting to know different people, and slowly building relationships like that. So it was very sort of natural and organic. And it felt great. It was good.
Yeah. Co-working or professional collab spaces, they're amazing places for that natural relationship and natural business development to occur. Throughout the 14 years of Ruby Assembly, I think I've been in at least 6, and then I opened my own just because I feel like it's such a wonderful place to not only win business, but more importantly, to have your daily efforts of turning up and doing the work and delivering the promise observed and witnessed by another person.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that.
So when we're considering networking, it's such a landscape of different formal to quite casual kinds of, processes and systems that you can engage yourself in. What have you engaged in recently?
Yeah, so I started networking in a co-working space. I've recently joined a B&I networking group, which is a much more formal way of networking. And then I'm constantly going to different events. I'm reaching out to people, and I'm trying to build my network that way. So I'm kind of involved in a couple of different things.
And just for people who are not aware of what B&I is, I think it probably bears value explaining BNI a little, because they're one of the more mature networking brands globally.
Yeah. So generally when we're talking about networking, it's going to events, it's meeting with groups of people, and it's just building your networking, building relationships. BNI is a really structured way to do that, where every week you're turning up to a group of people, having a breakfast together, and you're incentivized to network. So what that means is within any BNI chapter, say there's 40 people, there's a dedicated video person, there's a dedicated social media person, a dedicated lawyer. And anytime anyone in that group gets a referral, they will pass it to the dedicated person in that group. So if I have anything coming through for law, I'm going to go straight to that BNI lawyer first. And so it's much more structured. There's KPIs on how many times you should meet with people and talk to them, and how many referrals you should send. And it's a much more structured way of networking.
Yeah. I think that having experienced BNI as well myself, either having attended as a guest on behalf of clients or actually joining one myself, which I have done, I think that BNI is a really good starting point for people who are total newbies to business. Because it kind of teaches you about what you might like and what you won't like. It kind of gives you a sense of the way that other people who are, maybe in the earlier stages of their business development do business. Just teaches you a lot. But it's definitely not the only way that you need to network. Some people are really put off BNI because they feel that they are compelled to refer to people, and they may actually have great connections outside of the BNI, which again is why it could be a good place for people to start initially. James, do you look for a definite outcome when you are engaged in networking?
So it's a great question. Thinking about it now, there's probably 3 main ways I network. First would be being part of a co-working space. I think if you're starting out or you're in business, join a co-working space. Iolanthe has one, so maybe check that out. But be part of a co-working space because you naturally build relationships with people. And it's kind of low effort and it's natural and it feels authentic. Second is going to formal things like a BNI networking group. And the third one that I do is in a very targeted way, I reach out and recruit mentors, people who are like 10 years ahead than me. And I find these people, I reach out to them and I request their time and I start building relationships with them. And that's not only led to growth in business, but it's just led to huge growth in learning. And the only way that has worked is that when my intentions are to truly build a relationship with that person, I'm not trying to take anything. I'm genuinely thinking in my heart and mind, I'm thinking, how can I just learn about this person and see if we relate? Like, how can I share this human experience with that person?
Yeah. That approach, that openness and the authenticity of which you're building the foundation of the relationship. I think that's the core of any successful networking, which is why sometimes more formal structures can feel a bit synthetic.
Yes.
Because great business is done when people who are like-minded or share values that are similar, they don't need to be the same kind of people, but they need to have some kind of similarity or shared values, come together, their powers combined. So what I've found in terms of what has worked for me in networking, I'd say I'm a really prolific networker. I do 75% of it in the digital space.
Cool, yep.
And then I do the remainder in physical. When I first began my business, I was networking a lot. I was probably going out 3 times a week networking. And that would have been going to events because I'm a commercial writer, so I need to be in places where people, they might need content for cultural events or whatever it might be. So I find that in terms of bang for buck, in terms of time, it's much more effective for me to contribute to online spaces or indeed to build my own online spaces and share really openly so that people who are attracted to the media that I design are able to enter into conversation with me. One of the most powerful ways that I network online is through the curation of my own Facebook group. So I've got a 600 plus member Facebook group called Serious Women's Business. It's just a forum for people to pretty much ask business questions. In terms of the content, it's mostly dominated by Iolanthe related stuff. But having that many eyeballs in a contained space on things that I'm doing as the curator, or when I'm choosing to host a panel event and put on breakfast for people from that network in my own space on my own dime, that stuff is just hugely valuable because in a way it's all under my own umbrella of influence. And that is single to many networking
I love that.
quite quickly. But in order for that to work, you need to be fairly on the ball with designing content and making the space feel welcoming for a variety of people. I have done more formal in-person networking with BNI and I found that it's a pretty old school form of networking that seems to be part of like a generational shift almost. So maybe in 30 years, I really wouldn't expect BNI probably to exist, at least in the iteration it does now, because of the enforced referrals, but also because of the wacky meeting times. Like when we want to do networking, and I'm really concerned with people with networking being a democratic process to some degree, when we have meetings that are like really early in the morning each week, it means often that caregivers who are also business owners are locked out of that equation. And when people are penalised for not being able to turn up to a meeting every week, that's also not great. They're not ideas that are built around inclusion and diversity. They're not built for women, I think, a lot of the time.
That's a really good point.
I think that there's a generational shift and more old school B2B kind of businesses can get great benefit from BNI. But I found that when I participated, that I was able to give a lot of referrals, but I wasn't really able to refer many because by default, the people in that group were just not very technologically minded. That's why they were in the BNI, right? So when entering any networking structure, and, James and I think would both recommend that you have a crack at a whole variety of different ones. Just weigh up, not ROI in terms of like pure, dollar return, but even interpersonally, is this kind of working? Is that kind of working for you?
No, I think that's a great point. I think when you do consider it through that lens, it isn't really designed for women and caregivers because, it's just it's not something that you can easily do of rock up to a 6:30 a.m. meeting every week. I think it's sort of talking about like how do you get clients? Like if you're starting out your business, you're a coach, you're a consultant, or some type of service provider. Like how do you get clients? And I've sort of realized after doing this for a couple of years now that there's no silver bullet to get clients. What I've found are a couple of different ways that are sort of standardized. Like there is cold outreach, there is going to networking events, there is producing content. And I think what you have to do is really think based off who I am and what I stand for and my skill set, what's best for me? Like if you're really good at writing, then maybe you should just be smashing out blogs. Or if you're very confident in talking to people and networking, maybe you should be at those early morning meetings and trying it. But I think it's just relative to you, your situation, and what's actually going to work for you.
Yeah. And I think that making the most of those investments that you've made in terms of time, networking is really important. So, shortly we're going to talk about the do's and do nots of networking.
Yes.
But if you have made a connection with somebody at that networking event, that's valuable. You've spent time on it. You've spent emotional energy on it. Follow it up. Put the information into some kind of CRM. Reach out to them again. Don't let those things slip through your fingers because of the sheer busyness of B2B organisations, service-oriented. Connections can really easily slip away if you don't follow them up.
100%.
So make sure that if you have spent the time in schlepping at 6:30 in the morning or going to whatever it might be, spending money on a fancy ticket to an event, that the networking that you do, even if it's limited in terms of numbers, that it really works for you.
Totally. How about some do's and don'ts of networking? What are your thoughts there?
So I'm not like a business card machine when I go to networking events.
Right.
I recently went to quite a fancy one, actually. It was a Vecchi one. Vecchi is a Victorian Chamber of Commerce in Melbourne. And they run these really fancy networking events 4 times a year that are in premium Melbourne locations. They're catered, they're gorgeous. And I was invited along as a guest and I didn't really know what to expect from the night, but there's the clue. I have an open hand in terms of expectations around what I'm going to get from that networking experience. I do not want to mash my business card into the hands of 30 people and not remember a person at the end of the night. So I kind of thank my guest for inviting me. I grab my snacks. I follow the white rabbit. And by that, I mean, if I look at somebody and I think I want to talk to them for whatever reason, anything from their handbag to their posture to the fact they might be alone or that they could be in a group of 4 people who are laughing, I'll follow that inclination.
Yeah, cool.
And I'll just introduce myself and I'll begin a conversation. And then I might get 3 business cards and at that Melbourne event, I think I've probably pretty much got 1 piece of business out of that.
Awesome.
If I had been business card mashing, I don't think I would have got that outcome, So the do is open-handed expectations, following up, and the don't is business card mashing. How about you?
I love that. I think that's awesome. I think I think it has to come from an authentic place. I think any networking situation, I think the intention should just be to start that relationship. Like you're right at the start of just building that seed of the relationship. Maybe it'll lead to business later on. Maybe it won't. But for me, really the goal is I just want this person to know who I am. Hopefully we have a good conversation. And my ideal situation is that they follow me online. They connect. And that way, as my content's coming out, they're slowly learning more and more about me. They're like, oh, I've met James before. I've seen like 4 or 5 of his videos. Oh, actually, I have a need. Can I reach out to you? That's sort of my aim when I'm approaching these things.
I think in terms of proof of concept, you begin to understand that your approach is, that being a mixture of cold outreach, networking and content design, that it's working when you go into a new room full of people and you say to someone what it is that you do, or you mention the name of a business, and they go, "Oh, I think I've heard of you."
Yeah, totally.
And I imagine that you experience that, and I also experience that. And it's not an ROI-able kind of like, I've gone to this many meetings, so it means that Janice from BNI and Sandringham is going to know who I am.
Right.
That's ludicrous. But it does mean that something's working if you're getting that level of saturation and you're given the opportunity to continue educating people about what it is that you do.
Yep, totally agree.
What is the best networking experience that you've had, and then what is the worst one you've had?
Best networking experience I've had is really just from co-working. So it's one of the guys that I sit close to in my co-working space, he has someone looking for video content. He referred this person to me, and it was just really natural. It was pretty much like, "Oh, James, hey, so-and-so is looking for something. Do you want me to intro you?" I'm like, "Sure." Very simple, very easy. And that led to a huge amount of work, like huge multiple projects with this client. The sales process was easy because it was coming through as a trusted referral and was just awesome. Worst networking experience, I suppose, there was just somebody I had met at an event, and just from the get-go, it felt very, very inauthentic. Like it felt like there was like an ulterior motive. It felt like it was just like gross. Like that's a feeling you get. And we had an initial meeting at that event, and then we went for a catch-up to talk about business, and it was just so awkward, and I could just tell, I don't think this person is like... I don't trust this person. Like, I don't really know what the situation is here, but it's just an awful, uncomfortable experience. Like, I felt like I wasted time. This person's not authentic. I don't really know what sort of thing their motivation is, but it was just a bad feeling.
Yeah. I think we all know that vibe, and that's what you want to stay away from.
Yes.
In terms of my best networking outcome. It's actually a romantic story. So I had my business in a co-working space in Brunswick East for many years. And there's a building in Melbourne that's called Orica House, and it's a very important architectural building. It was the first skyscraper in Melbourne.
Wow.
And when I was a real estate agent many years ago, I used to sell homes in East Melbourne, and I'd look at this beautiful building and I'd be like, I would love to have a business in there one day, like such a special, iconic building. Then I found out that a co-working space was going to be opened on the top 3 floors of Orica House. And it was at this really seismic changing point in my life. Unbeknownst to me, my then marriage was about to end. So I didn't know this, but I knew that I wanted to push my business to a new level, and I was going to pay more for my rent, and I took a space at Orica House. Marriage ended. 3 months later, they opened. I was ready for a whole new journey in my life. Going into the city to the beautiful new offices at Orica House was like a breath of fresh air. It was a safe space. A month later, I met my now husband there. So his business was on the same floor as my own.
Right.
And then within a year, we'd travelled to Europe, we'd bought a home, and
Amazing.
We were pregnant with our first child.
Wow.
So that is a really great networking outcome.
Yeah, there you go.
But, throughout Be to Better, you'll hear me quite often say that my business has given me everything in a way, and it's an ultimate teacher because it's like this driving force forward, and whether it's educating me about different ways to be a better employer or indeed driving me towards my destiny, it truly is that vehicle. So in terms of a networking outcome, that came from a co-working space. I was in the right space and my intuition was to go there. So that's the best networking outcome.
Love it.
In terms of like a dodgy networking outcome, it's actually not necessarily the really horrific, slimy feeling ones, which can happen with some regularity in some networking environments. The worst one I can think of is actually one that felt super disappointing. It was with somebody from a really formal networking kind of organisation, and they wanted to meet with me and have a discussion about like kind of almost doing a co-branding or collaboration. And when I explained my business model to the person and my approach to ROI and metrics, they were really like almost angry and dumbfounded by the fact that I wasn't connecting my prospecting activities or indeed the work that we do with our clients with a distinct ROI. It wasn't part of that person's worldview. And it's like he wouldn't go forward with a business relationship. We weren't well said it anyway, but he wouldn't go forward with a business relationship unless he could genuinely see what an ROI would be from each client referral. Which is not the way that we work. And that felt really disappointing because it felt like there were some aspects of this person's business which could have been like a nice fit, but because of the person's rigid mentality about ROI, it was a bit of a fail.
Yeah. I think you can feel that with different businesses that you interface with. Does this organization purely value profit and ROI, or do they care about me making a difference in who I am as a person? And I think it's just where we're at the moment. Like, people want to work with people that they care about, that care about them, that are really making a difference. And you feel when someone's just all profit and ROI. And I guess the question we have now as consumers is like, well, do I need to work with this person? And you don't, because there's so many other options out there.
Absolutely. Let's talk about networking and referral fees.
Yeah.
What's your attitude towards referral fees in business relationships?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I've kind of come into this in quite an organic way where for a long time, I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that you could actually get paid from sending referrals. So at this point in my business career, I don't have any formal networking agreements like that. All I really have is lots of relationships with people who really trust me, and they just know if I send a client through, James and the team are going to do a great job. And I will try and refer as much as I can to that person, and I'll just constantly try and do a great job. And that's all I do. And it's kind of working out really well.
Yeah, that is very similar to our own attitude. Because Ruby Assembly does such a specific thing in terms of content for professional services, there are lots of people that want to develop referral relationships with us.
Right.
But
Because just to interrupt, like, this is the thing, like, those people who are more profit driven see your business as like, wow, that's a great opportunity for me because you're connected to so many business people.
Yeah.
But the whole way that you've got there is through building really great relationships and caring about people. And so it's like this mismatch of like ROI versus no, like I really care and try to help these people.
Yeah, totally. So there's that mismatch. But also, when it comes to like referral fees, because I'm a really strong referrer, we only refer to 4 other parties in total, and they are parties that are tried and tested by Ruby Assembly. We will not refer a client, like a partner, unless we have experienced superior service from them.
That's amazing.
Because our relationship with our clients is so precious that there's no way that I'm going to want to send them somebody who is going to do anything but a brilliant job for them. So that's really important to me. But also, I don't demand that the person I'm sending the business to pays me. That seems like not only of limited financial value to me, it seems like it's too pecuniary. It's too confusing for the relationship and the client's understanding of the way that relationship rolls out, I think. But also, I just want the other person to do a really good job for my client. And I'm going to get business back from that.
100%.
I don't need a $200 fee to incentivize me to do something. My first drive is quality. It's not a nominal fee.
Yeah, I love that.
So I know that some people are really into it. When I meet those people, they tend to be more from the really structured, BNI-ish adjacent world, which I don't connect with that well myself, I suppose. Let's talk about how much we should spend on networking activities. So how long is a piece of string, really? What are some notes that you might have around expenditure and value when it comes to networking?
So I think firstly, like, as you're starting off, you really want to be conscious of your finances, because you can really quickly get into a bad position if you're spending too much cash, particularly when you're starting. So I think in general, you should be thinking, how can I get the most bang for my buck as a start? Do I need to invest in a formal networking thing right off? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I do think it's important to really think about, well, what am I getting out of this? So if I do go into a more structured networking environment and I spend 6 months there and I've spent money on it and I've got nothing in return, I'm also spending my time, I'm starting to weigh that up like, that might not be the best option. And I think in general, you should be able to look at all your opportunities and just have a bit of an audit and think, well, out of the things that I'm doing, what's giving me the most bang for my buck? Maybe it is like a structured networking, but maybe it's not. And I think you just need to figure that out.
Yeah. And don't equate spending a large whack of cash with necessarily getting value either.
Yeah,
I know that there are a number of groups. I'm going to name several groups that you could explore. One is Fresh Networking, which is like a more chill version of BNI but has similar structures. Another one is Coraggio, which is a premium networking group. It's expensive by my meaning of premium. There's the Club of United Business, which is kind of similar but to Coraggio, but it's marketed as a bit more sexy. They're some of the premium, iterations of networking in Melbourne. Just because it is expensive, you're getting a seat at the table with people who may also be maybe smaller businesses who are stretching themselves to be there. Or you could be in a group with people who are, they could be influential kind of blue chip business owners. You don't really know until you go, but say it costs you $20,000 or $25,000 a year. That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
and you might be able to get similar outcomes by venturing into less premium networking spaces. You might spend $10,000 on networking a year and the remaining $15,000 on your marketing. When you're in startup, that could make really good sense. So don't think that just because something is expensive, has fancy surrounds, that it's necessarily offering you great bang for your buck. It might be, but it might not. It just depends. And I guess the one last thing that I just want to share is that sometimes with business networking, I mean, it's all a little bit culty, let's be real, but sometimes there is a conflation between personal development and business development, which can have costly interpersonal outcomes. Like there's a group called Landmark, which really position themselves as an optimizing of human experience organisation. But a lot of people from business go there for coaching. There's organisations like Lululemon that, for example, take all their staff through the Landmark process. But there are other elements of Landmark that can be a little bit culty. So my word to you would be just examine online, look at some reviews, see what's happening. Stay sexy, don't get murdered. And just work out what makes sense for your personality, what makes sense for your budget, and what makes sense for the values that you want to build into like your referral relationships with other business owners.
I love that. I think that's amazing.
So James, are there any closing things that you'd like to share about
I think like
networking that any warnings or any like premium hints?
I think you should view it all as a learning experience. I don't think you should get so sucked up by any particular group. I think you should always remain independent in yourself and your own business. And it's really just an experience of testing things out. What works? Do I like BNI? Do I like Landmark? Do I like this or that? And just sort of finding out what works for me and what works for my business. And ultimately what helps me grow, because I think there's so much noise that you can get caught up in. But if it's helping your business and it feels good, I think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I agree. And we hope that you all post today's podcast, that you all have a little bit of a look around your local community for both more structured networking opportunities and more casual ones. And above all, that you give it a crack.